How do we convince people who have the power to say yes, that proactive measures are cost effective? And there was pretty broad agreement that this is an issue that hasn't been worked out very well. The notion that business as usual is not working, the cost of inaction is unacceptable, and resisting change is not an option. We're not going to stop climate change, for example. So this is the reason we need to use the language of prevention rather than crisis response, which is cheaper coronary bypass surgery or diet and exercise, and which is more effective. This is well understood for non-infectious disease, but not for infectious disease for some reason. And it's not carried over into other areas particularly well. It has not been taken seriously by a lot of people for issues of managed retreat and other areas associated with global climate change. So in our action plans, we need to make plausible arguments for cost effectiveness of being proactive. How can we create a sense of urgency before crisis response is necessary while people think we can afford to spend money on prevention? We need to have a sense of urgency that's sufficient to catalyze voters and to catalyze cooperation. And then finally, we began to talk a bit about the possibility that inaction at some point in the near future is going to lead us to have to begin speaking of triage. When do we have to make decisions about which ongoing activities are no longer worth funding? How much time do we have before we replace incentives with coercion or simply abandon those who will not cooperate? How much effort do we put into people who do not want change, even at the potential risk of their lives? So, for example, coming from the US situation, at what point do we simply refuse to let people who are not vaccinated onto an airplane? At what point do we simply abandon climate change deniers to their fate? And these are not particularly happy kinds of thoughts, but we have to understand that we may in fact be close to that point.